We have been studying Sri Aurobindo's commentary on the Kena Upanishad. The second chapter of the text of the Kena describes the three gods, Agni, Vayu, and Indra, successively sent out to meet this strange, formless presence which has appeared before them as if a challenge, to remind them that their victory is not really theirs, but it is of the divine. The Brahman appears before them as a vague and tremendous presence, Yaksha, as if challenging, asking a question. If you are everything, what am I? And it is the moment when the gods are forced to awaken into an awakening that there is something greater than them. And it is the victory of that in them which is the true victory. We have seen in our study so far that these three deities not only are universal, they're also at the same time within us psychological powers. And so the whole study has to be seen on both levels. Three stages of awakening to the divine consciousness, both in a collective evolution, in humanity, and in the individual, and separately from that, in the universal evolution, three stages. We have seen also these three deities represent Agni as the master of the material domain, Vayu of the vital domain, and Indra of the mental domain. So it's clear that their sequential emergence are the three steps of the emergence of the material evolution, followed by the vital evolution of life force in matter, in form, and then the evolution of the mind in living matter. If you observe the three sequences, the next one cannot enter, or rather cannot emerge, until the previous one has had its full play. Until first matter develops its domain of forms, you cannot have life force entering the forms and animating them. Until there are living, animated life beings, mind cannot enter and awaken in them. And yet, mind is the greater power which has in the first place put out the organized life force. And life force is the power which has in the first place put out the energy which has created the forms. So Agni is dependent on Vayu, Vayu dependent on Indra, as far as the first entry is concerned. But in the evolution, as they reveal themselves, the dependence reverses. Unless Agni creates the forms, life cannot express. Until living forms exist, mind cannot express. So what we see here in the sequence, first Agni, preparing the ground, then Vayu, building on Agni's preparation, and taking the whole effort to know the divine one more step. And when he fails also, then Indra, who eventually completes the journey. But recall also our earlier discussion from Sri Aurobindo, where he describes how each of these gods is really an aspect of the same one. It is the same one divine consciousness which is hidden inside in matter as the divine will pushing forward as Agni. As the forms are created, it is the same consciousness which takes the poise of life filling in the forms, and the same consciousness awakening mind inside the living forms. So you can see them as a continuum, but involving three distinct qualities or stages or powers. In our text study so far, we have looked at Agni and his role. He is the creator of forms, so he knows all things which are forms. And he does not recognize who this is. Not only he does not recognize, when He is given the challenge. A blade of grass is placed, a form. Agni is asked to burn it, and he cannot. And he comes away saying, I could not know what is this great presence. And the next is Vayu, who has been sent forward. And it is this which we have been studying. Vayu as the life energy. He takes up all forms, enters into them, and plays and enjoys the life play. And it is he who is now sent forward. When he approaches the demon, the Eternal asks him, who are you? And he says, I am Vayu. I am he that expands in the mother of things. He is then asked, what is the force in you? What is the special feature which distinguishes Vayu? He says, even all this I can take for myself, all this that is upon the earth. And then the Eternal places a blade of grass and says, take this. And the text of the Kena goes, he went towards it with all his speed and he could not take it. Even there he ceased. Even thence he returned. I could not discern of that. What is this mighty demon? So in the commentary, Sri Aurobindo explains that Vayu, Matarishwan, and the power in him is that he, the life, can take all things in his stride and growth and seize on them for his mastery and enjoyment. But even the veriest, frailest trifle, he cannot seize and master so long as it is protected against him by the shield of the omnipotent. As long as that divine presence stands behind the grass, nothing, not even Vayu, who is able to take up everything in the universe, not even Vayu can take. Vayu too returns, not having discovered. One thing only is settled, that this is no form or force of cosmic life which operates within the limits of the all-grasping vital impulse. It is too great for Vayu. Now here we will step back and look at what this whole challenge represents in evolution and in us. What is it that Vayu does after in Agni and prepares for in Indra? Here the clue comes when Sri Aurobindo says, within the limits of his all-grasping vital impulse, the cosmic life force is unable to grasp this. Why? Because it operates within the limits of the all-grasping vital impulse. In other words, where Agni has created the form, Vayu grasps the form with the vital impulse, animates the form and pushes the form forward, preparing in the process the entry of conscious mind of Indra. And this transition is of extreme importance. We will look at what Sri Aurobindo has to say, both of Vayu and his relationship with Indra, as well as the nature of this transition. In his Secret of the Veda, Sri Aurobindo has an entire chapter dedicated to Vayu, the master of the life energies. And here Sri Aurobindo takes 5 verses of the Veda, which are particularly oriented to Vayu and Indra, and he elaborates on their meaning, at the same time dwelling upon the deeper sense of Vayu. Behind that is the larger Vedic image that the whole purpose of this evolution is for the awakening of the divine consciousness, of the Satchidananda. And that higher light force are all bound here in the inconscient. From there they emerge bit by bit. Agni struggling, working to build forms, Vayu animating them, Indra illuminating them. And so the same sequence exists here also. And in this case, the rising up from the ocean of inconscience is described as the honeyed wave of sensational existence, with its undelivered burden of unrealized delight, climbing to the full clarified mental consciousness and the illumined Ananda that descends from above, climbing all the way to the heaven of immortality. So, the first experience we have in the appearance of life is this sensational, a kind of a sweetness, thrill becoming like an excitement, which is awakening when first life force begins to play inside forms. If you observe carefully the insect world, you will see it in a kind of a frenzied agitation. What drives it? It is this some kind of a strange sensation, agitated, chaotic, but it is the first sensational existence like a honeyed wave rising. Sweetness, in its gourd, in its impetus. It's exactly the same thing we experience in the human consciousness also. Because we feel this sensation, we are made to move forward. You wake up in the morning. Certain days, you're so dull, you don't want to move. Other days, there's a kind of a bright energy which is pushing, nudging, as if you don't move, then you're not fulfilling yourself. It is this lightness, brightness, quickness of the energy which is driving you. The same has a cruder, coarser character, which is purely a kind of a physical pleasure sensation which goes instinctively. The same thing grows to be brighter, lighter when it becomes conscious and not so instinctive, bright, fresh, and you jump out of bed. And it is from there that the transition from the vital energy and impulse changes to mind, aware, self-aware, taking charge. It is this transition which is being described here. And very interesting image he uses here, the secret name of the mental consciousness, the tongue with which the gods taste the world, the nexus of immortality is the Ananda which the Soma symbolizes. I don't go too deep into it, but you get the sense here of how the consciousness from above leans down to enjoy the world and taste the world experience. So there's a movement awakening from below, meeting the movement descending from above. The two join and complete in the linking of the highest divine Ananda with the lowest material form in which the Ananda can play and express itself. Now, in between is this passage where Vayu plays his key role. And we skip some paragraphs and focus on, selectively, I will cross several sentences. Sri Aurobindo explains what is the role of Vayu. First, he says that the knowledge struggles to emerge from the heart of things, the ocean of the subconscient, where the light is bound. And then he says, they move in the path on the borders of the subconscient, dense, if impetuous in their movements. This is the low instinctive drive, pushing, limited by the nervous action in small formations of the life energy, Vayu. And then purified progressively by the spacious heart and mind, these energies of nature become finally capable of the marriage with Agni, the divine will force which breaks down their boundaries and is himself nourished by their now abundant waves. So the first play is Agni and Vayu. Agni breaks the limitations and frees the life energies to become wider, freer. That is the crisis of the being by which the mortal nature prepares its conversion to immortality. So this is the first passage, first crisis. Agni breaks the barriers in which the life energies are bound. As the energies are freed, Agni himself gets nourished by their larger movement and greater possibility of play. This is the challenge when we see first life emerging out of matter, struggling in small, weak, not complex, but largely instinctive forms, and then breaking out of that into a freer, wider, more complex life form. And then comes the stage after. So, what is Vayu now? Vayu is the lord of life. By the ancient mystics, life was considered to be a great force pervading all material existence and the condition of all its activities. It's everywhere, in all things, even where there is nothing. It is this idea that was formulated later on in the conception of the prana, the universal breath of life. Now, you will find in almost all the old traditions, there is this image of the breath, and there's a distinction between the human breath and a kind of a divine breath. So, in the biblical tradition, for example, they speak of the breath infused into the human form. And so, in many occult symbolic traditions, they will breathe to transmit energy. An object is taken and you blow on it as if to infuse life force or a higher consciousness into it. The linking means of communication, of energizing, is breath, giving life by breathing into the form. And in the Islamic tradition, even the concept of God, Allah, one of the symbols or one of the interpretations of the sound Allah is the great breath. The Ah is the breath, the ultimate breath. And you see this idea pretty much common in some sense that there is something wide present which breathes into, but in the process makes possible all this life. Nothing in creation could be if not by the push of this great universal life force. Prana is a more specific, narrow sense, the life energy as it animates the physical body. And it's the same life force which takes on a more materialized grade of action. And then he says, all the vital and nervous activities of the human being fall within the definition of prana and belong to the domain of Vayu. Yet, this great deity has comparatively few hymns to his share in the Rig Veda. And even in those suttas in which he is prominently invoked, does not usually figure alone, but in company with others, as if dependent on them. And you'll see the truth of this when we look at the psychology of the human being. Life force in us, what can it do by itself? Nothing. So life force has to animate body, matter, or it has to animate mind. So we have a physical life, we have a mental life. We don't have life. Life has to combine with something to give it life. And so you will find generally he is with Agni or with Indra. He is especially coupled with Indra. And it would almost seem as if for the functionings demanded from him by the Vedic rishis, he needed the aid of the superior deity. And what when he turns to matter? And there is the question, when there is the question of the divine action of the life forces in man, Agni, in the form of the Vedic horse, Ashva, the Dhikravan, takes Vayu. Now the same action, you see, life force, when it moves to the material domain, the image is of a horse. The power of the horse, but bound in the form and the movement of the form. And it is really Agni which is the creator of forms. So it is Agni as the horse that is seen when life force combines into form, physical form. So here's a detailed description of how they play out. We will read selectively, I will jump some lines. If we consider the fundamental ideas of the rishis, this position of Vayu becomes intelligible. The illumination of the lower being by the higher, the mortal by the divine was their principal concept. Light and force, go and Ashwa, the cow and the horse were the object of the sacrifice. That's always from above, the light and the force descending, illuminating everything below. Force was the condition, light the liberating agency. And Indra and Surya were the chief bringers of light. Moreover, the force required was the divine will taking possession of all the human energies and revealing itself in them. And of this will, this force of conscious energy taking possession of the nervous vitality and revealing itself in it, Agni, more than Vayu, is the master. Agni, more than Vayu, and especially Agni Dadhikravan, was the symbol. For it is Agni who is the master of tapas, the divine consciousness formulating itself in universal energy, of which prana is only a representative in the lower being. So, this is really the description of the relationship between these. Life force working with Agni in matter, life force working with Indra in the higher illumination. Now you can see why in the sequence, in the Kena, first Agni, then Vayu, then Indra. But from Agni to Vayu, there is a preparation. If Agni did not first go and try to meet and recognize and seize upon this divine possibility, Vayu could not do his work. Until Vayu has done his work and prepared the ground, Indra could not do his work. Remember, the gods ask them to go forward. The gods say to Agni, you go. Then they say to Vayu, you go. Who are the gods? And we come back to the human being. Within us, all the psychological powers are the deities, the gods. All of them are one, taking so many different aspects. So it's as if we, as a whole, in our consciousness, all the awakening divine powers, together as one, put forward one power, which works to know the divine, goes as far as it can, fails, but in the process prepares the ground for the next power to emerge, which goes as far as it can, fails to complete, and puts forward the third power, which then meets first a blankness and then finds the means to complete. In other words, in our evolution, first the struggle to know through form, the appearance of forms, then the seizing on the forms by the drive of the life force, the vitality which conquers and widens beyond the limitations of the forms. Then in that awakened vitality, the mind awakening, which now can see and know directly. So the three stages of evolution. If you look carefully at the emergence through a very physical means in the universe, at a very physical level, first you have this matter, and its characteristic is the entropy. It is always breaking down. It is always reducing in its order. Everywhere in the domain of pure matter, you have forms emerging, breaking down. In all processes of matter, the overall quantum of energy seems only to dissipate. Chaos seems only to increase. But then you ask, where did it come from? And then comes out of it the second stage, life force. And when life enters material form, suddenly this tendency of entropy changes. We have a second phenomenon we call syntropy, spontaneous emergence of order, spontaneous possibilities of things falling into place, becoming form. A plant takes up the chaotic material and builds out of it a beautiful flower or a fruit or the form of the tree. What did it do? What is its content physically? It is the same substance as the mud. Somehow the energy has taken up the mud and rearranged its molecular structure until it becomes something of perfect order. And so this is the second phase where life stands out. And out of that, as the mind character emerges, even in matter, we see the emergence of order and the perfection of the order in the form of the flower, in the form of the internal structure of the tree, in the spontaneous arrangement, even in the crystalline structure. It is the gross chaotic entropy which becomes a kind of a spontaneous self-organization in syntropy, and the organization becomes a perfect order, perfect structure in the form. And all this is exactly entirely in the domain purely of matter. We see these three levels. There is a further fourth step when the divine consciousness enters matter that we discover. So, entropy, syntropy, order, and the fourth step is the emergence of what we would call serendipity. Spontaneously things falling into place, which logic could not have foreseen. When the order first emerges and mind functions, there is a logical sequence, a logical chain, dependencies. And so much of physics relies on that. If this knocks that, that will knock that with this much force, and so on. It's almost mechanistic. But when the divine force begins to play inside these, this knocks that, and somehow there is much more. One and one become not two, but 3 or 10 or 100. Spontaneously, things falling into place create a far greater capacity than the sum total of the parts. But the thing appearing spontaneously itself is miraculous because it is not logical. And it is this which we see, the serendipity and the spontaneous things aligning, which is the character of the divine matter. Now, the same four-step process repeats in the domain of life energy. In the domain of the living experience of life, there is the struggle of life itself, where matter dominates life initially and tends to pull it down, make it narrow, weak, and eventually collapse into the entropy. Or where life takes upon its own fullness, comes up with a full grandeur, seizes upon things, expands its scope, and so on, preparing the way for a greater order. When a forest grows out and sustains itself, the little forms die, but the whole continues and grows. It is transforming even the domain of matter. Where a forest has stayed for 1,000,000 years, the soil has become more fertile because it has changed matter itself. Such is the power of revealed life. It can take up matter. Matter cannot overcome it anymore. And in the forest, you see this complex interdependence and order. The divine aspect is not so obviously seen. Into that, now, when the human life emerges, we see the same four-step process. There is at the very material level of human life a tendency always to fall into grooves, into past habits, into the inertia of the momentum of the past. And inevitably, you will see human beings say, well, I do this because that's how we have always done it. So in the social order, you will see this form where society fears to take up a new possibility. And when it stays stuck with the past forms, there is always a breakdown. There is always a degeneration. Or the life energy acts in the mind. It seizes on mind and says, what if? And it tries to explore new possibilities, jumps around experimenting, freely creating, often chaotically. But in the process, the human possibilities expand. You will see this in many civilizations. Once they have grown out of a first struggle to survive, there is the bursting out in a wild experimentation. If it does not move forward beyond that, of course, that itself can dissipate and break down things. But if it moves forward, it finds, oh yes, having experimented, here, this is the right place for this. This is the right place for that. It begins to organize life. And that's when it begins to dream of perfection, but a mental perfection, an organized, structured perfection. And it organizes all its activities and parts so well that it almost suffocates itself by organization. And at that point, again, it can break down if it stops there, if it does not open to the fourth possibility, where it breaks free of its own self-set regulations. The regulations are used only to the extent they help, and then something looks beyond to a spontaneous emergence, not of its instinct, but of an intuition, of a higher possibility, of the vision seen, inspiring, now in a well developed, free, and capable mind, which can receive and use the powers of organization as necessary to fulfill something which is beyond narrow, logical limits. And that's when we turn to the action of the supermind. And the entry of the supermind in human life, the first experience is this syntropy. Things spontaneously happen, things spontaneously fall into place, almost like a miracle. Unexpectedly, something happens which you could not have done with your own conscious effort and struggle. And yet, your effort was necessary somehow to prepare for it. Unless Indra does his work, the further awakening cannot take place. So, we see now the sequence of the three stages on a cosmic scale, repeating within each of the three. In the domain of matter, the three stages repeat, and the fourth. In the domain of life, the three stages repeat. In the domain of mind and our mental life, the three stages repeat. But the fourth can be now accessed more directly, consciously. So the working of these three powers is to be understood in this sense. Sri Aurobindo continues, so I'm going back to the text itself. With this background, we will appreciate much better the interplay between Indra and Vayu. Here he says, it is Indra and Surya and Agni who effect the great manifestation of the conscious divinity out of the subconscient. Vata or Vayu, the nervous activity, is a first condition of the emergent mind. And for man, it is the meeting of life with mind and the support given by the former to the evolution of the latter, which is the important aspect of Vayu. So the support given by the life to the emergence of the mind. Life is what is creating the possibility for mind to emerge. Therefore, we find Indra, master of mind, and Vayu, master of life, coupled together. And the latter, that is Vayu, always somewhat dependent on the former. The Maruts, the thought forces, although in their origin they seem to be as much powers of Vayu as of Indra, are more important to the rishis than Vayu himself. And even in their dynamic aspect are more closely associated with Indra, Rudra, with Agni, Rudra, rather than the natural chief of the legions of the air. So this thought, which is referring to thought forces, maruts, these are the first thought impulses awakening in us. Observe when you wake up from sleep, you're not yet thinking consciously. I'm feeling uncomfortable. And there is a thought which emerges from a sensation. I feel unhappy. From my unhappiness, a thought comes up. What is this kind of life? Now, this is not a self-aware thought. It is an emotion turning into thought form. This first emergence is described as the maruts. They are at first as much powers of life energy as of mind. They seem to emerge out of the life impulse, but they have a mental character. So they are in between. It is this in-between passage which is more important for the rishis than even the actual play of the life force. And he's describing certain verses. We skip that. So these two, Indra is the master of the mental force, Vayu of nervous or vital force, and their union is necessary for thought and for action. Now here's the interesting thing. Vayu supports mind and energizes mind so that there is thought. Mind needs Vayu when it turns to action. So you see the interdependence between the two. If the life force in you is dull, I can't think, I'm too tired. Unless Vayu becomes bright, mind doesn't have the energy to think. On the other hand, mind is bright, I want to do, but I don't have the energy to do. Vayu is not supporting. So there's an interdependence. They are invited to come in one common chariot and drink together of the wine of the Ananda, which brings with it the divinizing energies. Vayu, it is said, has the right of the first draft. So when we enjoy the life experience with Vayu and Indra, they're both going to enjoy, but first Vayu has to partake. For it is the supporting vital forces that must first become capable of the ecstasy of the divine action. And as he comes into with the chariot, another verse, to drink of the immortalizing wine, the chariot symbolizes movement of energy, and it is a glad movement of already illuminated vital energies that is invoked in the form of Vayu. Vayu has to expel all the powers of denial, of obscuration, of non-manifestation. To do this work, he must arrive with his steeds of her yoking and Indra of her chariot. The steeds of Indra, of Vayu, of Surya have each their names, and he describes what those things are. And these are the horses, that is the powers by which these deities act. And so again here the idea here is that Vayu has this critical function before mind can awaken, before consciousness can become self-aware. Vayu has to clear the way, remove the obscuration and the denial. And he's describing the number 100 and what that means, and how Vayu is asked to come in 100 with 100 horses, 100 representing the fullness of all the possibilities of consciousness. And so he says, it is therefore a complex energy of consciousness which is to be the result of Vayu's movement. It is the fullest, it is the emergence of the fullest movement of mental activity, now only latent and potential in man. The 99 steeds that are yoked by the mind. And in the next verse, the final one unit is added. We have 100 horses, and because the action is now that of complete luminous activity, these steeds carrying Vayu and Indra are no more limited. They become brilliant because 100 represents the fullness. So with this, I think we will set aside our exploration of the deeper sense of Vayu. And coming back to the text now, you see how Vayu, struggling now to realize the divine, has prepared the way, prepared the ground for the mind. In the larger collective human evolution, you will see these three taking this process, which Sri Aurobindo describes in the passage from the Kali Yuga to the new Satya. He explains how, when all the past has been broken down, all the past forms which were so useful have broken down, and the human consciousness is first bound in matter, there is still within us the urge to find deeper satisfaction, deeper meaning, the deeper truth of things. And at that point, the first direction it takes is satisfying the physical body, its demands, its instincts, its needs. Make my life comfortable, make my life physically happy, and I will be happy. Having done that, of course, it does not work. And so the next emergence is the fulfillment of life force. I will be happy when I own not just my safe little house and my comfortable, tasty food, but when I own all the houses around me. When I can grow much more food and sell and widen my influence and my reach and interchange with others and grow in my power and energy and strength and importance. And so the life impulse comes widening out. And from the transition of a more physically driven life, a physically driven humanity, we have the vital life and the vital humanity, conquering and expanding its dominion, enslaving everything in the process. And out of that, when that is done and exhausted, what else is there? And the emergence of the mind coming forward and says, it's not enough that I possess. I must arrange. I must organize. I must make perfect what was not perfect in nature. I must make perfect what is not complete in me as a human being. I must make perfect the society which is still driven by instincts and the past evolution of our animal life. Perfect by what? By the power of mind which understands to organize. To organize and make perfect. And this is the character of modern age and the promise of modern science. And modern science said, with new technology, with science, we will make sure nobody has hunger, body has all the comforts, and society will be so arranged to make it happy. And of course, that fails. Mind says, what next? And that's when the breakthrough takes place to a spiritual possibility, a grade of consciousness beyond the intellect. And first, the mind is afraid, even it is stunned. And then it begins to turn, it begins to give in. And this initial passage of fear and stun is what is described here in the Kena. When Indra has gone forward, this time, unlike the other two who met the demon and the demon said, who are you? When Indra moves forward, the demon vanishes. And Indra experiences only a blank, an emptiness. And says, where is this? What is this? When the mind approaches the divine, it cannot. It fails. It sees only a blankness. And then he pursues. He does not come back. Because he is capable of wandering and exploring this domain. And he pursues and then meets the woman, Uma Haimavati. And she reveals to him of the eternal. So this is the next step in the evolution, which is what Sri Aurobindo will describe in the text we now take up. So Vayu having failed, it is too great for Vayu. Indra next arises, the puissant, the opulent. Indra is the power of the mind. The senses which the life uses for enjoyment are operations of Indra, which he conducts for knowledge. And all things that Agni has upbuilt and supports and destroys in the universe are Indra's field and the subject of his functioning. If then this unknown existence is something that the senses can grasp, or if it is something that the mind can envisage, Indra shall know it and make it part of his opulent possessions. But it is nothing that the senses can grasp or the mind envisage. For as soon as Indra approaches it, it vanishes. The mind can only envisage what is limited by space, by time and space. And this Brahman is that which, as the Rig Veda has said, is neither today nor tomorrow. And though it moves and can be approached in the conscious being, distance. Yet when the mind tries to approach it and study it in itself, it vanishes from the view of the mind. The omnipresent cannot be seized by the senses. The omniscient cannot be known by the mentality. So this is the whole paragraph of Indra's first attempt to know the divine. We will study this a little more depth because there are many important nuances to this. First, we see that successively the three have been described as presiding over certain activities of the human consciousness. Indra, we see, presides over the senses and the mind's power to conceive. And Agni, we had seen earlier, is what gives the form and so the speech. Life force Vayu was the life breath. So now these four powers in us are precisely the four powers which appeared in the first verse of the Kena, when it raised those four questions. By whom missioned falls the mind shot to its mark? So Indra is the lord of this mind's working. By whom yoked moves the first life breath forward on its paths? This is the domain of Vayu. By whom impelled is this word that men speak? Domain of Agni. What God set eye and ear to their workings? This is again domain of Indra. And so we have to stop. Why didn't they put in the sequence the senses along with the mind? But we understand in the sequence it is top down. In the domain of Agni, which is form, and the speech is the expression of form, creating forms, giving forms to things. But it is in the domain of matter when mind acts that you have the senses. So it is actually in the domain of matter the mind's working. So mind has two levels of working. Mind in its own domain conceives. Mind turning to matter perceives through the senses. In both cases it is seeing, and the seeing is actually inside the same. But to our experience it has two different characters. Let's explore what that means. It's a topic we have touched upon many times. When we look at an object, I say that I'm looking at the tree. There is a physical experience of seeing through the body's senses. But who is really seeing? Not the eyeball, not the lens through which the light is focused. The retina itself is only reflecting an image, but it's not seeing. The nerves, the optic nerve which take the signals, are only carrying signals. They are translation of what the retina registered. It's not seeing. It goes into the brain is processing, but the processing is not seeing. The seeing is taking place by the mind. The mind plugs into the brain, and through the brain, through the optic nerve, reaches out through the eyes to gaze upon and register. The same mind through the brain enters and extends through the ears to listen. Now, your biology will tell you the light goes in and is processed. The sounds go in and they are processed. But actually, your subjective experience is different. You are able to turn your attention to things. Let's say you're looking at an image, a scene. There are trees, there's a mountain, there are birds. Your attention can focus on the flowers on the trees. To the exclusion of all else, I did not even notice the birds. I did not notice the mountain, and I was so interested in the flowers. So it is as if there is an active outreach by the mind. It's not just what comes in as an image. The image contains everything. What is it you see? What the mind dwells upon. And if the mind is told not to see, it can also not see entirely. As under hypnosis, you could be told that you will not see the color red. And you look around and anything which is red will appear to you invisible, or you will be unable to see it. Why? Because who is seeing? Not your retina, which is still registering the red, not the brain, which is still processing the red, but mind. And mind has been told to filter out and not see, and so it does not see. So in all the operations of the senses, the real agency of experience is Indra. But Indra as plugged into the biology and working through the physical senses. But what it sees, and in the domain where it sees, it is still Indra. And that domain is exactly the same in which the mind conceives and pictures in its own imagination. So let's say you visualize a flower before you, and what you see with your mind's eye is taking place in the same space in which your physical sight and the flower it sees is being registered. So something very interesting happens. Look at the tree now before you, but in your mind visualize the flower, visualize a lotus, and suddenly you do not see the tree anymore because your mind is busy with the picture it is creating and does not pay attention anymore to the picture coming through the biology. In other words, it is in the same space that the picture actually takes place. In one case, the picture comes in another case, the picture is as if emergent within mind space, as if created by mind. Now comes a very important observation. What you created in your mind space and what was coming in, are they really different? What is it that makes us see the flower as red or yellow? Why is it all of us are seeing the same lotus and experience it as pink? Why is it all of us see the same sky and experience it as blue? Although all our cells are different, the balance of chemicals in each of the cells of your retina are different, the arrangement of your brain cells are completely different. You might say, well, it could be that each person experiences differently, but we have been taught to call it blue. But something proves that this is not true. All of us looking at blue experience a calming effect. All of us looking at red experience an exciting effect, which proves that the perception is the same in all of us. So why is it that although our entire biological machinery is utterly different in each person and differently evolved, yet the mind in us is seeing red as red and blue as blue? And the solution to this is because there is one mind which is universal mind, cosmic mind. It sees the world in this particular way. It sees sky as blue and the lotus as pink. Our mind, being a part of the cosmic mind, therefore sharing in its perception, sees the lotus as pink and the sky as blue. Now we come to a very important conclusion. My mind's power of creation of sight, that is, I conceive of a new flower, and mind's power of perceiving through the senses are not different. It is the cosmic mind which conceived of lotus as pink and sky as blue. Therefore, my mind embedded in the body sees it as pink and blue. Mind created that experience of lotus as pink and sky as blue. Which mind? Not my individual mind, cosmic mind. My individual mind shares in the cosmic mind's experience when it sees the lotus flower. But when I sit down and conceive of a new flower which I'm going to paint or I'm going to create, and I conceive of it, my mind is separately creating. It is in a creative mode as part of the cosmic mind. If in my mind I can create a powerful enough image which can sustain on its own, I release it into the universe. Other minds will also experience and see this. There is a power within us which is sharing in the original creative power of creation, of conception. Because the divine conceived of the universe in this way, we perceive the universe in this way, but we also share in his conceptive power. We can conceive of something different in this universe and put out the energies to make it different. And if we make that strong enough, others share in what we may call a co-creative process. Together, we as if create and participate in the emergence of the universe, determining our common future by our power of conception. Although the secret truth is, when we think we have conceived, it is still part of the cosmic divine consciousness, which had already conceived of this possibility, awakening and working through us to give it special form, individually and collectively. So now you understand why the Upanishad takes pains to distinguish the mind's working in itself and the mind's working through the senses, they represent two different aspects of a single original power of mind. And suddenly you realize the kind of depth that exists in the text of the Kena. The tiniest suggestion, the tiniest nuance is intended to point to something extraordinary, something great, and a deep knowledge and insight. And if we hurry through, we miss these nuances, and Sri Aurobindo takes pains to point to each of these and show us the way. But his own commentary is so compact, because otherwise it would become too large. So he also, as he unfolds the knowledge, where there are finer nuances, he shows you the way with a suggestion, with a word, and moves on with the overall theme. So when he says that the mind can only envisage what is limited by time and space, and when it looks at something beyond time and space, the mind fails and sees only a blank. Because mind has a power of conceiving, of perceiving, can only operate within limits. I'm reminded of this example Mother gives, from which was shared with us by the teacher of dance in the ashram school. Having performed, demonstrated all her skills, Mother was dissatisfied. And then she said, "Now show me with dance peace. How do you express peace?" And you realize it's not so much the movement, it's not so much the posture, it's the state of consciousness. It is not tied to form. It can inhabit any form. You can show peace by a gesture like this, or you can show peace by movement of rolling. But the peace is not bound to the form. It is the state you have to embody as you express through the form of the dance. And it is the same thing when the mind meets the divine. It is not a mental conception. It is not the creative power of the mind which cuts out and limits in time and space, because that is beyond time and space. And so how does mind meet it? It has to widen out. And in the widening out, in the breaking down of all the limits of forms, of time and space, everything blurs out and becomes a big blank. And you can stop there and say, I cannot know. But the mind is capable of this plasticity. It can open out to this blank and it can wait. And wait until something in the higher power, almost bordering on the intuition, reaches beyond the domain of form and senses the presence and can feel the divine presence without needing to bind it into form. And this is what happens when Indra thus approaches. And so we read from the text. Then they said to Indra, the gods, then they said to Indra, Master of plenitudes, go thou, get thou the knowledge that is this mighty demon. He said, so be it. He rushed upon that vanished from before him. He in the same ether came upon the woman, even upon her who shines out in many forms. Uma, daughter of the snowy summits, to her he said, what was this mighty demon? Interestingly, with this question, the chapter ends. Indra now asks, what was this mighty demon? And what she answers becomes the fourth part of the Kena, the next chapter. And after her answer, all the rest is almost like a philosophical dissertation, as if an extension of her answer. And all she says, I read the first verse of the next part, she said to him, it is the eternal. Of the eternal is this victory in which you shall grow to greatness. Then alone he came to know that this was the Brahman. Now interestingly, in the vocabulary also, the gods have just had a victory. And they said it was their own victory. And the eternal came to remind them that no, there is something deeper It is his victory in them. And she says to him, of the eternal is this victory in which you shall grow to greatness. Meaning the victory achieved is only the beginning, and there is a much greater victory to be realized. And it is as if in revealing this, she pushes forward the whole evolution. And so the next step of the journey is not so much our powers of perception reaching to that, but she, the Divine Mother, revealing to us and leading us into the greater victory. So you see, the suggestion is very beautifully placed in the way it is structured. And after that, there's the story of the rest of it, which is often a philosophical description, which tells you how the gods now awaken in us. Remember, so far the gods were the normal process of evolution, having awakened into self-awareness, and they have the first glimpse of the divine, led by the woman. The gods undergo an awakening now. They thought it was their energy which conquered. Now they realize it is the divine energy. It is the divine himself who works through them, and they submit to the action of the divine consciously. And the gods undergo a great transfiguration, a great awakening. And that's the title of the next chapter, The Transfiguration of the Self and the Gods. So we are anticipating, there is now still another paragraph of Sri Aurobindo's commentary before that chapter. But you can see the sequence, the fourth stage, beyond Agni, where the divine begins to manifest, and the whole human consciousness and the working of the gods in us and in the cosmos align consciously to become instruments of the divine in the manifestation. We can meditate on this briefly, and we continue next Sunday.